You already know how to talk. But talking and communicating, those are two completely different sports. And right now, you might be playing the wrong one. Here's the thing, nobody told you. You've been in conversations your entire life, thousands of them, with your parents, your friends, your coworkers, your partners. And yet, how many of those conversations actually landed? How many of them left the other person feeling genuinely seen, truly understood, deeply moved? If you're honest with yourself, the answer might sting a little. Because most people go through their entire lives speaking loudly, frequently, confidently, and still never feel heard, never feel connected, never feel like the words coming out of their mouth are actually reaching the person on the other side. That's not a language problem. That's not a vocabulary problem. That's not even a confidence problem. That's a communication problem. And here's the wild part. It's fixable, not in years, not with a degree. In the next few minutes, I'm going to hand you something that most people spend a lifetime searching for without ever finding. A real, working understanding of how human connection actually happens. Your relationships, your career, your confidence, your ability to walk into a room and make people feel something. It all traces back to one skill. Communication. Master it, and doors open. Ignore it, and you'll spend your whole life knocking. So let's stop knocking and start walking through. Chapter 1. What communication actually is and what you've been missing. Stop for a second and think about the best conversation you've ever had. Maybe it was with a friend at 2 a.m., both of you sitting on the floor of a kitchen talking about things that actually matter. Maybe it was with a stranger on a train who somehow understood you better in 40 minutes than most people do in 40 years. Maybe it was a moment with a mentor, a partner, a parent, someone who said the right thing at the right time and made you feel like the world suddenly made sense. What made that conversation different? It wasn't the topic. It wasn't the setting. It wasn't even the words. It was presence. It was connection. It was the rare, almost electric feeling of being truly received by another human being. That feeling has a name in psychology: interpersonal resonance. And it's not an accident when it happens. It's a result of very specific skills that can be learned, practiced, and eventually owned. Here's the first thing you need to understand about communication. It is not primarily about words. Researchers have studied this extensively, and the numbers are humbling. Only about 7% of what you communicate comes from the actual words you use. Another 38% comes from your tone of voice, the rhythm, the pace, the warmth or sharpness in how you speak. And a staggering 55% comes from your body, your posture, your eye contact, your gestures, the way you lean in or pull back. Read that again. If you've been obsessing over finding the perfect thing to say in conversations, crafting your sentences, choosing your words carefully, rehearsing your lines, you've been working on 7% of the picture. The other 93%? That's where real communication lives. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The most powerful communicators aren't just sending better signals. They're doing something far more sophisticated. They're creating a shared experience between themselves and the other person. Think of communication like two instruments tuning to the same note. When they sync up, the sound doesn't just double. It transforms. Something new emerges that neither instrument could create alone. That's what happens in genuine human connection. Your nervous systems begin to synchronize. Your breathing patterns start to match. Your brain waves begin to align in ways that neuroscientists can actually measure. And when that happens, trust accelerates, ideas sharpen, creativity explodes. Problems that seemed impossible suddenly have obvious solutions. You remember those conversations for years because your brain was in such an optimal state that every detail gets etched in deep. The problem is this: almost nobody teaches us how to create this intentionally. We're taught to make our point, to defend our position, to wait for our turn, to be persuasive, to be loud enough to be heard. We're almost never taught to connect. And that gap between talking and connecting is responsible for more missed opportunities, broken relationships, stalled careers, and silent suffering than most people ever realize. Here's the foundation everything else is built on. Real communication rests on three pillars: presence, being fully here, not half listening while your brain rehearses its next move; empathy, the genuine ability to step into someone else's world and see it from inside their experience, not just observe it from outside; authenticity, the courage to be actually you in conversations, not a polished performance of who you think you should be. When all three come together, something paradoxical happens. You stop trying to impress people and you become genuinely impressive. You stop pushing your agenda and you gain more influence than you ever had before. You stop performing and people finally feel like they're actually talking to a real human being. That's the shift we're going for. Not tricks, not scripts, not manipulation dressed up in polite language. A genuine, root-level upgrade in how you show up when another person is in front of you. Chapter 2. The hidden psychology of why people open up or shut down. Every single person you meet is carrying something invisible. It's not a problem exactly. It's more like a frequency, deep, constant background signal broadcasting one message over and over. Do you see me? Do you respect me? Am I safe with you? This isn't weakness. This isn't insecurity. This is basic human psychology, and it runs in everyone. The CEO, the barista, the kid in the back of the class, the person who looks like they have it all figured out. Every interaction you have either feeds that need or starves it. And there is genuinely no neutral ground. When someone feels seen and respected in your presence, they open. Their thinking expands. Their walls come down. They share their real thoughts instead of their safe thoughts. They bring their best self to the conversation. When they don't feel those things, you might as well be talking to a locked door. The human brain runs a rapid, mostly unconscious evaluation in every interaction. 3 questions answered in the first few seconds. 1. Am I safe with this person? 2. Do they respect me? 3. Are they for me or against me? Most people are unaware this evaluation is even happening, but it determines everything. Whether someone's defenses go up or down, whether they share their real opinions or their rehearsed ones, whether they become an ally or a quiet obstacle. The communicators who seem to effortlessly draw people in. They've learned, often without realizing it, how to answer all 3 questions with yes before they've even said anything important. They radiate safety. They communicate respect through tiny, consistent behaviors, and they make people feel almost immediately that they're genuinely on their side. Here's something even more powerful that most people never consider. Everyone you talk to is operating from inside their own emotional weather system. They came into the conversation carrying something, stress from a meeting, excitement about a decision, grief about something they haven't told anyone, anxiety about a message they haven't responded to yet. They're not a blank slate. They're a whole person mid-storm. Skilled communicators learn to feel the weather before they start talking. If someone is overwhelmed, they slow down and create calm. If someone is energized, they match that momentum. If someone is skeptical, they lead with curiosity instead of argument. Same words, radically different landing, depending on the emotional terrain they touch down in. This is also why emotional contagion is so critical to understand. Emotions are genuinely contagious between humans. Your nervous system doesn't just observe another person's emotional state, it begins to mirror it. This means that whatever you're carrying into a conversation starts spreading before you've said a word. Walk in anxious, and you'll make the room anxious. Walk in genuinely curious and warm, and watch how quickly the other person's shoulders drop and their guard relaxes. Walk in with a quiet confidence, and you'll feel the energy around you shift almost immediately. This isn't mystical, it's neuroscience. And once you understand it, you realize that showing up well emotionally isn't just about you feeling good. It's an act of genuine service to everyone around you. Chapter 3. The Art of Knowing Yourself in Conversations. Here's an uncomfortable truth about communication. Your biggest obstacle isn't the other person, it's you. More specifically, it's the version of you that shows up without self-awareness, reactive, defensive, distracted, running old patterns that were built for situations you're no longer in. Most people spend so much energy thinking about what they want to say that they never develop real awareness of how they're coming across. And the gap between what you intend and what people actually receive is where most relationship damage, career stalls, and missed connections live. True self-awareness in communication means knowing your triggers before they go off. Everyone has them. Certain tones of voice, specific phrases, particular dynamics, someone dismissing your idea, someone interrupting you, someone using that particular kind of superior tone that sends you straight back to a moment years ago when someone made you feel small. The moment a trigger fires, your thoughtful, present self essentially goes offline. Your protective, reactive self takes over. And by the time you realize what happened, you've either said something you regret or withdrawn in a way that shut the conversation down entirely. Self-aware communicators develop the ability to notice the charge building before it explodes. They feel the temperature rising inside and make a conscious choice. Do I react or do I respond? That space between stimulus and response, tiny as it might feel, is everything. That's where your actual communication power lives. There's a mental skill called metacognition that makes this possible. It's the ability to observe your own thinking while it's happening. Imagine having a small, calm part of yourself watching the conversation from slightly above, noticing when you're starting to perform instead of connect. When your ego is driving instead of your curiosity. When you're listening to respond instead of listening to understand. Once you develop this observer, everything changes. You start catching patterns you never noticed before. The way you shut down when you feel unheard. The way you over-explain when you feel judged. The way you go quiet when you want to be seen. These aren't character flaws. They're just old habits, adaptive responses to old situations that your brain never bothered to update. Once you can see them clearly, you can finally start making different choices. Another crucial dimension of self-awareness is understanding how your current emotional state affects everything you say and hear. When you're exhausted, stressed, or already carrying the weight of a hard day, your listening narrows, your patience shortens, and your empathy goes thin. Emotionally intelligent communicators have a habit before important conversations, a quick internal check-in. How am I actually doing right now? What am I carrying into this? Is there something in me that might get in the way of hearing what this person is actually trying to say? This kind of honesty is disarming in the best way. When you can say, I want to be upfront, I've had a rough morning, and I want to make sure I'm really showing up for this conversation. You don't lose credibility. You gain it. People trust vulnerability far more than they trust polished confidence. Self-awareness also means understanding your own communication style well enough to adapt it without losing yourself. If you're naturally direct, you can learn to add warmth without becoming less honest. If you're naturally gentle, you can learn to speak with greater clarity. When gentleness isn't serving anyone, you're not changing who you are, you're expanding your range. Chapter 4. Listening, the most underestimated superpower you have. If communication were a workout, most people would be skipping the most important exercise. Everyone wants to work on their talking, their persuasion, their presence, their delivery. Almost nobody wants to work on their listening, and that is exactly why exceptional listeners are so rare and so magnetic. Here's what real listening is not. It's not waiting quietly while someone talks. It's not mentally preparing your response while they finish their sentence. It's not nodding along while your brain is 3 conversations ahead. Those are all just hearing with extra steps. Real listening is active, full-body, fully present engagement with another human being's experience. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you. Not politely, not performatively, truly. They weren't distracted. They weren't steering toward their own point. They were just with you, fully. And for those moments, you probably felt something rare and powerful. Like what you were saying actually mattered. Like you actually mattered. Most people go years, sometimes their entire lives, without experiencing that kind of listening. And when they finally do, they feel it immediately. They open up, they trust, they remember it. That is the power you're developing when you learn to truly listen. Active listening works in layers. The first layer is the words, but not just the surface meaning. Listen for the emotional content underneath. People rarely say exactly what they mean on the first try. They circle around the real thing, testing whether it's safe to say it. A person who says, "I'm fine," in a tight voice isn't telling you they're fine. A person who uses words like always and never isn't speaking literally. They're telling you how overwhelmed they feel. The second layer is everything not being said. The pause before an answer. The topic that keeps getting avoided. The energy shift when a specific subject comes up. Sometimes the most important thing in a conversation is the silence around certain words. The third layer is the whole person. Posture, breathing, eye contact. The way someone's energy changes as they talk. When you expand your listening to include all of this, you start catching information that most people miss entirely. And the fourth layer, the deepest one, is listening for what the person needs, not just what they're saying, but what they're longing for, what they're afraid of, what they're moving toward or away from without fully realizing it themselves. This kind of listening is genuinely transformative. It changes you as much as it serves the other person. When you spend time really listening to people's struggles and dreams without judgment, you become less reactive, more compassionate, and dramatically better at seeing situations from multiple angles. One of the most powerful practical tools in active listening is the reflective response. Instead of jumping straight to advice or your own experience, you first show that you've actually heard, not just the words, but the experience behind them. Something like, "It sounds like you're feeling pulled in every direction right now, and you're trying to figure out how to meet everyone's needs without completely losing yourself in the process." That kind of response does two things. It confirms that you actually understood, and it gives the person space to say, "Yes, exactly," or to correct you, which is equally valuable. Most people are so hungry for this kind of listening that they'll share more in 5 minutes with a genuine listener than they've shared with casual acquaintances in years. The question isn't whether this skill is worth developing. The question is, how soon do you want to start using it? Chapter 5. Reading People Without Saying a Word. You've been in this situation before. Someone tells you everything is fine, their voice is calm, their words are polite, but something you can't quite name tells you that everything is not fine. You weren't imagining it. Your brain was picking up on a completely separate conversation happening beneath the words. One that most people never learn to read consciously, even though they feel it constantly. The body doesn't lie the way words can. While the conscious mind carefully selects language, the body keeps broadcasting. Posture, micro-expressions, breathing patterns, muscle tension, the direction of a gaze, the timing of a smile. All of it is signal. All of it is data. Learning to read nonverbal communication isn't about becoming a human lie detector. It's about becoming a better listener, one who hears not just what's said, but what's meant. Let's start with the most revealing nonverbal channel, the face. Basics: emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, have fairly consistent expressions across cultures. But the real information lives in the subtleties, in the micro-expressions that flash across someone's face for a fraction of a second before their social mask snaps back into place. Take a smile. There are two fundamentally different kinds. A genuine smile, what researchers call a Duchenne smile, involves the entire face. The corners of the mouth lift, yes, but more importantly, the muscles around the eyes engage, creating those small creases at the outer corners. It's warm, involuntary, and almost impossible to fake convincingly. A polite smile only moves the lower face. The eyes stay neutral, friendly perhaps, but not real. Once you start noticing this difference, you'll see it everywhere, in meetings, on first dates, in job interviews, across dinner tables, and you'll realize how much emotional information you've been walking past your whole life. But even more valuable than reading individual expressions is learning to spot incongruence. The moments when someone's face and their words are telling different stories. Someone says they're excited about an idea while their eyes show concern. Someone claims they understand while their expression reveals confusion. Someone insists they're not bothered while their jaw is tight and their smile doesn't reach anywhere near their eyes. When face and words don't match, the face is almost always telling the truth. Eye contact is another rich source of information, but it requires contextual reading, not rigid rules. What matters isn't whether someone makes eye contact, but changes in their typical pattern. Someone who normally holds steady eye contact but suddenly starts looking away might be processing discomfort. Someone who's usually more reserved but begins meeting your gaze with unusual intensity might be trying to emphasize sincerity or urgency. Posture and body orientation reveal comfort and resistance before a single word is spoken. When someone is genuinely engaged with you, their body tends to angle toward you, a subtle but unmistakable lean of interest. When they're pulling back, even slightly, it often signals that something in the conversation isn't landing right. Open body posture, uncrossed arms, relaxed shoulders, feet pointing toward you, generally indicates receptiveness. Closed posture suggests some form of internal resistance, whether that's skepticism, discomfort, or simple coldness, but, and this is critical, never read a single signal in isolation. Someone with crossed arms might be cold, not defensive. Someone leaning back might be relaxed, not disengaged. Someone avoiding eye contact might be culturally trained to do so as a sign of respect, not hiding something. The skill isn't in cataloging individual gestures. It's in reading clusters, multiple signals that paint a consistent picture. When someone's arms are crossed and their posture is angled away and their responses are getting shorter and their voice has gone flat, that cluster tells a story worth paying attention to. Voice is one of the most underutilized channels of nonverbal reading. Not the words, the sound, the pace, the rhythm, the pitch, the pauses. A slight tightening in someone's voice can signal stress they haven't acknowledged yet. A sudden slowdown can indicate careful, deliberate thinking. Shallow, rapid breathing often signals anxiety or overwhelm, even when the words are saying, "I'm totally fine with this." Physical proximity is another signal that most people feel, but rarely analyze consciously. People naturally move closer to those they feel comfortable with and maintain greater distance from those they're uncertain about. When someone steps back during a conversation, they might need more space to feel safe. When someone moves closer, they're usually signaling trust or seeking connection. Here's the ethical principle that ties all of this together. Nonverbal signals are information, not verdicts. They give you clues about what might be happening inside another person. They don't give you certainty. The right response to noticing incongruence isn't to confront or interpret out loud. It's to slow down, create more safety, and perhaps gently check in. I want to make sure I'm explaining this clearly. Does this feel right to you? Used with care and genuine curiosity, this awareness makes you a dramatically more attuned communicator. Used with arrogance or as a tool for manipulation, it creates exactly the opposite of connection. The goal is always to use what you see in service of understanding, not to score points, win arguments, or feel superior. Chapter 6. Building the kind of trust that changes everything. Think about the people in your life you trust most completely, not the people you trust to show up on time or keep a secret, though that matters too. The people you trust at a deeper level. The people you'd call at midnight. The people whose feedback you actually take seriously. The people whose presence makes you feel genuinely safe. What made that trust possible? It wasn't one moment. It wasn't a single impressive conversation. It was built in layers, through small, consistent behaviors, repeated over time, until they formed something unbreakable. That's the thing about trust. It doesn't arrive in a grand gesture. It accumulates in micro moments that most people don't even realize they're either earning or wasting. Here's where it starts. Rapport. The subconscious sense of being on the same wavelength as someone else. When genuine rapport exists between two people, communication becomes almost effortless. Misunderstandings decrease. Defenses drop. Ideas flow more freely. Influence, real ethical influence, becomes almost a natural byproduct of the connection itself. And here's what most people don't know. Rapport isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you can create intentionally. The mechanism behind it is called unconscious matching. When people feel connected, they naturally begin to mirror each other, breathing at similar rates, using similar speech patterns, adopting similar postures, matching energy levels. You've seen this in couples who've been together for years, in close friends mid-conversation, in teams that are genuinely in sync. Skilled communicators don't wait for this mirroring to emerge organically. They initiate it, not by copying someone in an obvious, awkward way, but by subtly attuning themselves to the other person's rhythm and energy. If someone speaks quietly and moves slowly, flooding them with high-speed enthusiasm creates friction, not connection. If someone is naturally expressive and animated, responding with flat monotone sends a signal that you're not quite on the same planet. Matching energy isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding the version of yourself that resonates most naturally with the person in front of you. Language matching is another powerful rapport tool. If someone uses visual language, "I see what you mean. That looks right to me." Incorporating similar visual metaphors into your responses creates an almost invisible sense of being understood. If someone thinks out loud and processes verbally, giving them space to talk through their thoughts without rushing toward a conclusion signals that you're genuinely with them. But none of this surface-level matching works without the deeper layer, emotional resonance. When you can accurately sense and reflect someone's emotional state, not just acknowledge it intellectually, but actually feel an echo of it, something shifts in the conversation. The other person stops feeling like they're being observed and starts feeling like they're being understood. And that shift changes everything. Trust, at its foundation, is built through one thing above all others: consistency between what you say and what you do. But even in a first conversation, you can establish initial trust through what psychologists call micro-demonstrations of trustworthiness. These are small, almost invisible behaviors that signal your reliability and genuine care, remembering and referencing something they mentioned earlier in the conversation, keeping something they shared in confidence, following through on a small commitment you made 5 minutes ago, prioritizing their need to be understood over your need to make your point. One of the most counterintuitive trust-building moves is admitting when you don't know something. Most people assume that admitting gaps in knowledge makes them look weak. The opposite is true. When you say, "I don't know, but I'd love to find out," instead of manufacturing a confident answer, you demonstrate a kind of intellectual honesty that people find deeply trustworthy. False confidence is easy to spot and hard to forgive. Genuine honesty is rare and deeply respected. Another trust accelerator: authentic curiosity. Not the polite conversational kind, the real kind. The kind where you're actually interested in who this person is, what they think, how they experience the world. People can feel the difference between someone who's asking questions to seem engaged and someone who's asking because they genuinely want to know. When you're authentically curious about someone, they feel important, valued, interesting. And those feelings are deeply, almost irresistibly connected to trust. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, trust is maintained through one simple discipline: doing what you said you'd do, call when you said you'd call, send what you said you'd send, show up when you said you'd show up. These seem small. They aren't. Every kept commitment adds a brick to the foundation. Every broken one removes several. Over time, people will trust you not because you were impressive, but because you were reliable. And reliability, quiet, consistent, undramatic reliability, is one of the most powerful forms of influence in existence. Chapter 7. How to have the conversations nobody wants to have. Here's something most people do with difficult conversations. They wait. They wait, hoping the tension will dissolve on its own, hoping the other person will bring it up first, hoping time will smooth it over without anyone having to say the uncomfortable thing out loud. And sometimes time does help. But more often, the silence doesn't dissolve the problem. It marinates it. The resentment deepens. The distance grows. What could have been a 10-minute conversation that brings two people closer becomes a wound that quietly poisons everything around it. The ability to navigate difficult conversations with skill and grace is one of the highest value communication abilities you can develop, because these conversations, handled well, don't just resolve problems. They deepen relationships. They build trust. They create the kind of closeness that only comes from two people being willing to be honest with each other, even when it's hard. The first shift to make is in how you define difficult conversations. Most people frame them as conflicts, battles to win, damage to minimize, awkwardness to survive. Skilled communicators frame them as opportunities, chances to understand something they've been missing, to clear something that's been blocking connection, to find a solution that works for both people. That reframe changes your whole posture going in. Before you initiate any difficult conversation, do two things. First, get clear on your intention. What do you actually want from this? Not what you want to say. What do you want the conversation to accomplish? Understanding? A changed behavior? Repair of something broken? The clearer you are about your genuine goal, the more likely you are to reach it. Second, check your emotional state honestly. If you're still hot with anger or raw with hurt, the conversation will likely generate more damage than repair. This isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about ensuring you can express them constructively rather than reactively. When you do start the conversation, lead with safety. Make it clear, through your tone, your posture, your opening words, that your goal is mutual understanding, not blame or punishment. Something like, "I care about what we have, and I think there's something we need to talk through. I'm not here to attack you. I just want us to understand each other better and find a way forward that works for both of us." Then use I statements rather than you statements. This isn't just diplomatic nicety, it's structural. "You always dismiss my ideas in meetings." Immediately put someone on the defensive. "I've been feeling like my contributions aren't landing in our meetings, and I want to understand why," opens a conversation instead of starting a battle when the other person is speaking, especially if they're expressing frustration or pain. Listen for what's underneath the words. Angry words often carry frightened feelings. Critical language often masks a deep, unmet need. When someone says, "You never make time for me," they might really be saying, "I'm scared I'm losing you." Acknowledge the emotion before you address the content. Before you defend yourself, before you correct the record, before you explain your side, say something that shows you recognize what they're feeling. "I can hear how frustrated you are, and I want to understand what I've been missing." This isn't agreement, it's acknowledgement, and it makes a massive difference. Ask questions that go beneath the surface. What matters most to you about this? What would need to change for this to feel better? What are you most afraid of here? These questions accomplish something powerful. They help you find the actual issue, which is often buried beneath the presenting complaint. Someone might criticize the way you handled a project when what they're really expressing is a fear about being trusted with important things. Someone might attack your social choices when they're actually feeling invisible in the relationship. When conversations get too heated, pause without abandoning. "I think we're both getting activated right now, and I don't want to say something that makes this worse. Can we take 10 minutes and come back to this?" This isn't retreat, it's respect for the conversation, for the other person, and for yourself. And when you've made a mistake, own it, fully, specifically, without defensiveness. A genuine apology has 3 parts: what you did, the impact it had, and what you're committing to do differently. "I was dismissive in that meeting. I can see how that felt disrespectful," and it was. "I'm going to be more conscious of that going forward." Not, "I'm sorry you felt that way." Not, "I'm sorry, but you have to understand, I was stressed." Those aren't apologies. They're defenses wearing apology costumes. Difficult conversations done well don't end relationships. They build them. 2 people who can be honest with each other even when it hurts, who can sit in the discomfort of a hard conversation and come out the other side closer than before. Those people have something rare, and that kind of relationship is only possible if someone is willing to go first. Chapter 8. The Ethics of Influence, How to Actually Change Minds. Let's clear something up immediately. Genuine persuasion is not manipulation. It's not coercion. It's not the psychological equivalent of a con artist's sleight of hand. Real influence is the art of helping someone see a possibility they hadn't considered yet, one that genuinely serves them. The most ethical and effective influence doesn't come from pushing your agenda onto others. It comes from understanding someone's needs so clearly that you can help them meet those needs in ways that also happen to align with your goals. When both people win, that's influence. When only one person wins, that's manipulation. The distinction matters enormously, not just ethically, but practically. Manipulation might work once. Trust, once broken, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. The foundation of genuine influence is credibility. Before anyone will be moved by what you say, they need to believe 3 things: that you're competent, that you're honest, and that you have their actual interests at heart, not just your own. Once that credibility exists, something powerful becomes available to you: collaborative discovery. Instead of presenting your conclusion and then arguing for it, you guide someone through a thought process that helps them reach insights on their own. You ask questions that open new angles. You share information that expands their picture. You help them connect dots they hadn't connected before. When people reach conclusions themselves, they own them, they defend them, they act on them. When conclusions are handed to them, no matter how logically, they tend to hold them loosely, if at all. Understanding what motivates different people is essential here. Some people move toward possibilities. They're energized by vision, by upside, by imagining what could be. Others move away from problems. They're driven by the desire to avoid pain, failure, risk. Some need data and logic before they'll move an inch. Others need to feel that the people they trust support the direction. The same argument, pitched to all four types the same way, will land with one and miss the other three completely. The highest level of influence operates at the level of identity and values. When you help someone see how a decision aligns with who they actually are, with what they genuinely care about, and how they see themselves, resistance almost dissolves on its own. Given how much you value being present for your family, this might actually be worth considering. I know how seriously you take your team's development. This directly addresses that. This isn't flattery, it's alignment. You're not inventing a value and attributing it to them. You're genuinely paying attention to what matters to them and connecting it to what you're offering. Storytelling is one of the most powerful influence tools available because stories bypass analytical resistance in a way that logical arguments simply can't. When you share a relevant example of someone who faced a similar challenge and found a genuine solution, not a fictional one, not an exaggerated one, you give people the ability to imagine themselves in a similar positive future. And the brain, remarkably, has difficulty distinguishing between a vividly imagined experience and a real one, which means that the moment someone genuinely imagines a positive outcome, they've already begun to feel some version of the motivation to pursue it. Handle objections with curiosity, not combativeness. When someone pushes back, your first instinct might be to defend or counter. Try this instead. That's worth understanding better. What's driving that concern? Objections usually contain important information. They often reveal fears, unmet needs, or crucial context you didn't have before. When you treat them as valuable rather than inconvenient, you almost always come out of the conversation with a better solution and a person who feels respected enough to implement it. And finally, always ask yourself honestly, is this good for them, not just for me? If the answer is yes, proceed with confidence. If the answer is uncertain, find out. If the answer is no, reconsider the entire approach. True influence creates outcomes where everyone involved feels better for having engaged with you. That standard is higher than most people hold themselves to, but it's the only kind of influence worth building a life on. Chapter 9. Emotional Intelligence. The invisible engine behind every great conversation. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. Think about the most technically skilled person you know. Someone brilliant at their craft, sharp, knowledgeable, capable. Now ask yourself, are they also the most effective communicator you know? The most trusted? The most naturally influential? Probably not, because technical skill and communication effectiveness operate on completely different tracks. And the engine that drives the second track, the one that determines whether your interactions create connection or distance, trust or suspicion, inspiration or resistance, is something that has nothing to do with what you know. It's emotional intelligence. And it might be the single most underrated skill in modern life. Emotional intelligence isn't about being nice. It isn't about being emotional. It isn't about crying at movies or being endlessly patient with difficult people. It's about something far more practical: the ability to recognize, understand, and skillfully navigate the emotional realities that are present in every single interaction you have. Every conversation has two layers running simultaneously. There's the surface layer, the content, the information, the logical exchange of ideas. And then there's the deeper layer, the emotional undercurrent that determines whether the surface layer actually lands. Most people are entirely focused on the surface. Emotionally intelligent communicators work both levels at once. The first dimension is emotional self-awareness, your ability to recognize what you're feeling as you're feeling it, and understand how that emotional state is coloring everything you say and hear. When you're carrying stress into a conversation, your listening narrows. When you're feeling defensive, even a neutral question can sound like an attack. When you're anxious about an outcome, your certainty hardens into rigidity because your brain is trying to create safety through control. Most people have no idea this is happening. They experience the conversation as difficult, the other person as frustrating, the situation as complicated, without ever realizing that 60% of the difficulty is coming from their own unacknowledged emotional state. Developing emotional self-awareness requires building what researchers call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between emotional states with real precision. Not just, I feel bad or I feel good, but the specific texture of what's actually present. Is this disappointment or grief? Frustration or genuine anger? Anxiety or excitement? Concern or fear? This precision matters because different emotional states require genuinely different responses. The self-management approach that works when you're mildly irritated will completely fail when you're deeply hurt. The communication style that serves you when you're energized will create problems when you're running on empty. The second dimension is self-regulation, not suppressing your emotions, but developing the capacity to choose how you express them. Think of it like this: you don't get to choose the weather, but you absolutely get to choose what you wear. Your emotions are the weather. They're going to happen, and pretending otherwise just drives them underground, where they cause more damage. Self-regulation is the wardrobe, the toolkit that lets you move through emotional weather without being controlled by it. This starts with creating a genuine pause between what happens and how you respond. When something triggers a reaction, and it will, the pause is where your intelligence lives. In that small gap, you have options. Without the pause, you only have reactions. Advanced self-regulation means going further, learning to shift your emotional state intentionally before important conversations. A few slow, deep breaths before a difficult discussion isn't weakness. It's preparation. A brief moment of genuine gratitude before a negotiation isn't naivety. It's strategy. Your emotional state going into a conversation shapes the entire arc of where it goes. The third dimension is empathy, and it goes much deeper than most people realize. Surface empathy says, I understand you're upset. Real empathy says, I can sense what this feels like from inside your experience, and I'm willing to stay with that long enough to actually understand it, even if it's uncomfortable for me. True empathy requires what psychologists call theory of mind. The genuine, practiced recognition that other people's inner worlds are as complex, valid, and real as your own, even when their reactions look completely different from how you would react. When someone responds with what seems like disproportionate emotion, real empathy doesn't judge the proportion. It gets curious about the context. What history are they carrying? What need is underneath this reaction? What are they afraid of that they haven't said out loud yet? The questions that deepen empathy sound like, "Help me understand what this means to you. What's making this feel so important right now? What would it look like if this went the way you hoped?" These aren't therapeutic exercises. They're practical tools that dissolve defensiveness, accelerate trust, and consistently produce better outcomes than any amount of logical argument. The fourth dimension is social awareness, reading the emotional climate of groups, rooms, and organizations, not just individuals. Every team, family, and organization has an emotional atmosphere. Some feel psychologically safe, ideas are welcomed, mistakes are learned from. People bring their real thoughts to the table. Others feel like a minefield. People perform rather than contribute. Concerns go unspoken, and collective intelligence stays locked behind individual self-protection. As a communicator, you both read these climates and influence them through your own emotional presence. The most valuable people in any room aren't always the most technically skilled. They're often the ones who raise the emotional temperature toward safety, curiosity, and possibility, and who lower it away from anxiety, defensiveness, and blame. The fifth dimension is relationship management, using everything you understand about emotional reality to guide your interactions toward genuinely good outcomes. Knowing when to push and when to hold back. Knowing how to repair a relationship after a rupture. Knowing how to motivate someone who's feeling stuck without pushing them into resistance. One principle that cuts across all five dimensions: separate impact from intent. Just because someone didn't intend to hurt you doesn't mean the impact wasn't real. And just because you didn't intend to come across as dismissive doesn't mean the other person didn't experience it that way. Emotionally intelligent communicators hold both truths simultaneously. They can say, "I don't think you meant this the way it landed, and I want to understand what you were going for. But I also need you to know how it felt on my end." That sentence does something remarkable. It creates accountability without accusation. It creates space for understanding without abandoning your own experience. It moves the conversation forward instead of turning it into a courtroom. Emotional intelligence isn't a soft skill. It's the hardest skill, and it pays dividends in every single area of your life. Chapter 10. The Advanced Tools. When good becomes extraordinary, you've built the foundation. Now let's talk about what you can build on top of it. These advanced techniques aren't shortcuts or tricks. They're sophisticated communication tools that only work reliably when they're grounded in everything you've developed so far. Try to use them without the foundation, and they'll feel manipulative to you and to everyone around you. Use them from a foundation of genuine presence, empathy, and authentic intent, and they become genuinely transformative. The first advanced skill is meta-communication, the ability to step outside a conversation and talk about the conversation itself. Most people stay locked inside the content of whatever they're discussing, even when the conversation has clearly gone off the rails. Meta-communication gives you an exit ramp and a reset button simultaneously. It sounds like, "I notice we keep coming back to the same point without quite connecting. Can we pause and figure out what's getting in the way?" Or, "There seems to be some tension here that we're dancing around. Would it be useful to address that directly?" This technique is powerful because it interrupts unproductive patterns before they spiral. It also signals a level of conversational intelligence and self-awareness that instantly raises the quality of the interaction. The second tool is reframing, helping someone see their situation from an angle that opens new possibilities without dismissing their current experience. The key is that reframing is never a denial of someone's reality. It's an addition to it. You're not saying they're wrong to see it the way they do. You're offering a wider lens. Someone says, "This project is a complete disaster." A reframe might be, "It sounds like you're seeing some significant signals that something needs to change. What if those signals are actually giving us exactly the information we need to course correct before it's too late?" Same situation, completely different trajectory for the conversation that follows. The third technique is future pacing, helping someone vividly imagine a positive outcome until they can feel it, not just think about it. Picture this 6 months from now. You've implemented this change, and the morning that used to feel like running into a wall feels like stepping into something you actually built. How does that change the first hour of your day? When someone can genuinely feel a future outcome, motivation shifts from intellectual to visceral. And visceral motivation is what actually produces action. The fourth is strategic vulnerability, sharing something genuine and appropriate about your own limitations, struggles, or uncertainties in ways that create trust and psychological safety. Most people assume that showing any weakness will cost them credibility. The research consistently says the opposite. Calibrated vulnerability, not oversharing, not performing, but genuinely acknowledging something real, creates deeper trust than polished confidence almost every time. I want to be honest. This is an area where I don't have all the answers yet, and I'd rather think through it with you than pretend I do. That sentence builds more genuine authority than 100 confident assertions. The fifth is conversational threading, the art of weaving earlier moments of a conversation into later ones, creating a sense of coherence and attentiveness that feels remarkable to experience. When you reference something someone said 30 minutes ago and connect it to what's happening now, you communicate something powerful. I was actually here for all of this. I was listening. You mattered enough for me to hold what you said. That feeling is rare, and it's remembered. The sixth is temporal shifting, helping someone move between past, present, and future perspectives to gain insight they can't access from inside their current frame. When you've navigated something this hard before, what helped you find your footing? Shifts someone from feeling stuck in the present to accessing the resourcefulness of their past. 5 years from now, looking back at this moment, what do you think you'll be glad you decided? Opens a future perspective that often makes present decisions feel clearer and less fraught. Finally, there's conversational aikido, the art of redirecting difficult energy rather than resisting it head-on. When someone comes at you with aggression, cynicism, or hostility, the instinctive response is to push back. Conversational aikido does something counterintuitive. It moves with the energy rather than against it. You're clearly deeply invested in getting this right. I respect that. Help me understand what matters most to you so we can find something that actually works for both of us. You've just transformed an opponent into a collaborator, not by overpowering them, but by showing them that their energy has a productive direction to flow. Chapter 11. Communication that builds careers. Every career is ultimately a communication story. The ideas that get funded, the people who get promoted, the professionals others want to work with and learn from and follow, they're almost never simply the most technically skilled. They're the ones who can translate their skill into language that others understand, believe in, and feel moved to act on. Professional communication isn't a separate skill from everything else we've discussed. It's all the same skills: presence, empathy, listening, emotional intelligence, applied under higher stakes, with more structure, in environments that reward certain kinds of clarity and penalize certain kinds of ambiguity. Let's start with meetings, where more professional reputations are made and damaged than anywhere else. The most valuable person in any meeting isn't necessarily the one who talks most. It's the one who consistently moves the conversation forward, who asks the question that cuts through the noise, who names the tension everyone is feeling but nobody has said, who offers a perspective that reframes the entire problem. When you contribute, ask yourself before speaking, does this move us forward? Does this help the group think better? If the honest answer is no, if you're speaking to be seen, to fill silence, or to defend a position you've already made, silence is the more powerful choice. When you do speak, lead with clarity. The professional world runs on people's time, and the clearest signal of respect you can send is getting to the point without sacrificing substance. When you disagree, and you will, disagree with the idea, not the person. I want to think through this differently lands better than that won't work. And it lands in a way that keeps the room collaborative rather than defensive. Managing up, communicating effectively with people above you in any hierarchy, is one of the highest leverage professional skills in existence. And it's almost entirely about making other people's jobs easier while positioning yourself as someone worth investing in. Understand your manager's communication preferences. Some want detailed, frequent updates. Others want high-level summaries and only want to hear about problems when you've already thought through the solutions. Some prefer written communication. Others think better in conversation, the fastest way to find out. Ask directly, how can I communicate with you in a way that's most useful for you? Most managers will respect the question enormously and give you exactly the roadmap you need. When you bring problems up, bring solutions with them, not because problems without solutions are unwelcome, but because showing up with your thinking already engaged signals something valuable, that you're invested, you're capable, and you're already doing the job before anyone asked you to. Written communication, email, messages, documents, deserves far more intentionality than most people give it. Words on a screen carry none of the warmth, tone, or nonverbal context that makes face-to-face communication forgiving. What feels direct to you might feel cold or dismissive to the person reading it on a bad day. Before sending anything important, read it from the recipient's perspective. Not, did I say what I meant to say, but what will this person feel when they read this? That reframe will save you more professional relationships than you realize. And when something is genuinely complex or emotionally sensitive, resist the pull toward the efficiency of email. Pick up the phone, schedule the call, have the conversation that actually requires a conversation. Text and email are powerful tools. They're terrible substitutes for real human dialogue when real human dialogue is what the situation needs. Chapter 12. The communication that matters most. The people you love. Everything we've covered so far matters, and all of it matters most when applied to the people who are closest to you, because professional communication at its worst costs you an opportunity. Poor communication with the people you love costs you something that can't be replaced. The fundamental difference between professional and personal communication is the stakes, not in terms of career or money, but in terms of meaning. Your relationships with family, friends, and romantic partners aren't transactions. They're the context within which your entire life takes place. How well you communicate inside those relationships determines, more than almost anything else, how much joy, connection, and genuine security your life contains. Personal relationships require emotional attunement at a level that professional settings rarely demand. The people closest to you aren't communicating on just one channel. They're broadcasting across all of them simultaneously, and many of those channels are ones they might not even be fully conscious of themselves. Learning to read and respond to those channels requires one foundational commitment: genuine curiosity about the inner world of the people you love, not curiosity as a technique. Curiosity as a way of being, the ongoing active interest in what someone's experience is actually like from inside their own life. People have different emotional languages. Some process difficulty by talking extensively. They need to say everything out loud before they can understand what they think or feel. Others need silence and space before they're ready to engage. Some feel most loved through words of appreciation. Others feel most loved through quality time, physical presence, acts of care, or thoughtful gestures. What makes someone feel deeply loved and understood is specific to them. The only way to know is to pay attention, over time, with genuine interest, and with the willingness to ask. Conflict in close relationships is inevitable. What determines whether conflict strengthens or erodes a relationship isn't whether it happens. It's whether both people can hold on to their care for each other while they navigate it. The discipline that makes this possible. Separate the behavior from the person. You can be genuinely frustrated with what someone did while still fundamentally believing in who they are. Keeping that distinction alive, especially when you're hurt, is the difference between a conflict that clears the air and one that leaves lasting damage. Use I statements not just as a communication technique, but as a genuine orientation. When this happens, I feel this way, keeps you honest about your own experience without turning the conversation into a character assassination. And listen, especially when it's hard to listen, especially when what's being said triggers something in you. The moments when listening is hardest are almost always the moments when it matters most. The most important conversation in any close relationship isn't the difficult one. It's the regular, ongoing, non-crisis conversation. How are we actually doing? What's working? What do we need more of? What do we need less of? How can I love you better right now, in this season of your life? Relationships that only talk about themselves when something's wrong develop a negative association with honest communication. Relationships that talk about themselves regularly with curiosity, appreciation, and genuine care build something resilient enough to survive the hard seasons. The people closest to you deserve your most developed communication skills, not your most polished or most impressive, your most present, most honest, most genuinely caring. That's the standard worth holding yourself to. Chapter 13, Standing Up and Speaking Out, the Art of Public Communication. There's a specific kind of fear that lives in the body. Before you stand up to speak in front of people, your heart rate climbs, your mouth goes dry, your hands might shake slightly. Your brain, which was working perfectly fine 5 minutes ago, suddenly decides this would be an excellent moment to go completely blank. You are not alone in this. Public speaking consistently ranks among the most common fears humans report, sometimes above physical harm, sometimes above death itself. And the reason isn't mysterious. When you stand in front of a group, the social stakes feel enormous, judgment feels possible, failure feels visible, the vulnerability is real. But here's what the fear doesn't tell you. That vulnerability, managed well, is the very thing that makes a speaker compelling. The speakers who genuinely move people aren't the ones who look like they feel nothing. They're the ones who feel everything and channel it into presence, energy, and connection with the room. The first shift that transforms public speaking from ordeal to opportunity is understanding what your actual job is when you stand up to speak. Most people think their job is to deliver information correctly. It isn't. Your job is to create an experience for the people in front of you, an experience of understanding, of possibility, of feeling something that shifts how they see the world or themselves. Information is the vehicle. Connection is the destination. This reframe changes everything about how you prepare. Instead of starting with, "What do I want to say?" you start with, "Who are these people? What do they need? And what would make this genuinely valuable for them?" Every decision that follows, what to include, what to cut, how to open, how to close, becomes clearer when it's filtered through genuine service to your audience. Your opening moments are everything. Audiences decide within the first 30 seconds whether they're in or out, whether this is worth their full attention or whether they can afford to drift. Don't waste those seconds on logistics, pleasantries, or apologizing for being nervous. Open with something that earns their attention immediately. A question that stops them mid-thought. A statement that contradicts something they assumed was true. A scenario so specific and recognizable that they feel, before you've explained anything, that you understand something about their life. The best opening does one thing above all. It makes the audience feel that this is for them, not for you, not to demonstrate your knowledge, for them. Structure matters, but not in the way most people think. The goal of structure isn't logical organization, it's narrative momentum. Your audience should feel at every moment that they're moving somewhere, that each section builds on the last, that the whole thing is going somewhere worth going. A simple, powerful structure. Here's where you probably are right now. Here's why that's creating a specific problem. Here's a different way of seeing it. Here's what becomes possible when you do. Beginning, tension, reframe, possibility. It works because it mirrors how people actually change their minds. Storytelling is your most powerful tool in front of any audience. For exactly the same reason it's powerful in one-on-one conversation. It bypasses the analytical brain and speaks directly to the imagination and the emotions. Abstract concepts bounce off people, specific, vivid human stories land. But there's a crucial principle most speakers get wrong. You are not the hero of your presentation. Your audience is. Your stories, your examples, your experiences, they exist to help the people in front of you see themselves more clearly, to help them recognize their own situation, their own potential, their own path forward. The moment a speaker makes themselves the center, the audience becomes observers. Moment they make the audience the center, the audience becomes participants. Managing anxiety before you speak isn't about eliminating the feeling. It's about redirecting it. The physiological experience of nervousness and excitement are almost identical. Your heart rate elevates. Your breathing quickens. Your senses sharpen. The only difference is the story you tell yourself about what that feeling means. I'm terrified and I'm ready can describe exactly the same physical state. A practice that consistently works. Before you walk out, take 3 slow, deep breaths. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, hold empty, 4-4. This single technique activates your parasympathetic nervous system, lowers your cortisol, and gives your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for clear thinking and genuine connection, back online. And then, instead of walking out thinking, "Don't mess up," try this. I have something genuinely useful to offer these people, and I get to give it to them right now. That mental shift from performance anxiety to genuine service is one of the most reliable ways to transform how you feel on stage. Virtual presentations deserve specific attention because they introduce friction that in-person environments don't have. You lose the nonverbal richness of shared physical space. You can't feel the energy of the room. Technical delays disrupt natural flow. Screens create distance. Compensate by being more intentional about everything. Look directly into your camera, not at the faces on your screen, to create genuine eye contact. Use more verbal signposting than you would in person. Ask questions directly and by name. Vary your energy and pace more dramatically, because the medium flattens everything slightly and you need to actively counteract that. And remember, exceptional virtual communication isn't about mastering the technology. It's about refusing to let the technology become a reason to show up as less than fully present. Chapter 14. Communicating in the digital world without losing your humanity. Something quiet but significant happened to human communication over the last 2 decades. We gained extraordinary reach, the ability to connect with anyone, anywhere, almost instantly. And in the process, we lost something harder to quantify: the richness, the nuance, the warmth, the forgiveness that makes face-to-face communication so much more than information exchange. Digital communication strips away the 93% of conversation that isn't words, the tone, the body language, the energy, the 1,000 subtle signals that tell us what someone really means. What's left is text on a screen, carrying the weight of intentions it was never designed to bear. The result is an epidemic of misunderstanding, messages read as cold that were written warmly, feedback received as harsh that was meant as caring, silence interpreted as rejection that was simply busyness, efficiency, mistaken for indifference. Understanding how to communicate through digital channels without losing your humanity isn't optional anymore. It's a core competency of modern life. Email is where most professional communication lives and where most professional miscommunication is born. The medium lacks warmth by default, which means you have to add warmth deliberately. A single sentence at the start of an email, "Hope your week is off to a good start," or "Thanks for the quick response, genuinely helpful," does something measurably different than diving immediately into the transactional content. It reminds both people that there's a human being on each end of the exchange. Structure your emails to respect the recipient's time and cognitive load. Lead with the most important point, not with context and background. Make your request or action item unmistakably clear. Keep it as short as the content allows, not shorter, but never longer. Before you send anything with emotional weight, read it back through a different lens. Not, "Did I say what I meant?" but "How will this land on a bad day?" Because you don't know what kind of day the recipient is having. And digital communication has almost no ability to self-correct in the moment the way conversation does. When a written exchange starts generating heat, when responses get shorter, sharper, more defensive, that's the signal to switch channels immediately. Don't try to resolve genuine tension through email or text. Pick up the phone, schedule the video call, have the human conversation that the situation actually requires. Text messaging has become the default communication channel for many relationships, professional and personal alike. It's fast, informal, and deeply convenient. It's also remarkably easy to misread, misuse, and overuse. A few principles that prevent a lot of unnecessary friction. Be thoughtful about timing. A message sent at 11 p.m., even with no expectation of immediate response, lands differently than the same message sent at 10 a.m. Understand that response speed carries emotional information in text culture. A long delay to a simple question can feel like rejection, even when it's just busyness. And recognize when a text conversation has grown complex enough that it deserves to be a real conversation. Social media deserves a category of its own because it operates on different psychological rules than private communication. Every post, comment, and reaction exists in a semi-public space, visible to audiences you might not be consciously imagining when you write. Tone that works in private conversation, irony, edge, exaggeration, often fails to translate when it lands without context in someone's feed. The most important question to ask before posting anything that carries any emotional charge: how could this be read by someone who doesn't know my history, my tone, or my intentions? The gap between how something was meant and how it can be read is where most social media communication damage lives. Video calls have become the closest digital approximation of real conversation, which makes them more powerful than other digital channels and more demanding. The temptation on video calls is to split your attention, half on the person, half on your email, half on whatever is happening in the corner of your screen. Resist this. The value of a video call over a voice call is the ability to be genuinely present with someone, to be seen and to see. Multitasking on video calls wastes the only thing that makes them worth having. Digital boundaries have moved from luxury to necessity. The always-on nature of digital communication, the expectation of immediate availability, the blurring of work and personal time, the constant low-grade stimulation of notifications creates a kind of chronic background stress that erodes your ability to be present anywhere. Setting boundaries isn't antisocial, it's self-preservation. Be clear about your response time expectations. Create technology-free spaces in your day and your home. Protect the hours and environments where you need to be fully present, with the people you love, with the work that requires your full attention, with yourself. The quality of your digital communication will never exceed the quality of your inner life, and your inner life requires quiet, reflection, and genuine downtime to function at its best. The ultimate principle for navigating the digital world without losing yourself in it. Technology is a tool for human connection, not a replacement for it. Every digital communication channel you use should either enhance a real relationship or create the conditions for one. When it stops doing that, when it becomes a substitute for the genuine presence that real connection requires, it's time to put the screen down and find the person. Chapter 15. This is where it actually begins. You've just covered ground that most people never cover in a lifetime. Not because the information isn't available, it is, but because most people approach communication as something that happens to them rather than something they can consciously shape, practice, and master. You're not most people anymore, not after this. But here's the most important thing I can tell you about everything you've just learned. Knowledge is not transformation. Reading about swimming doesn't keep you from drowning. Understanding the principles of connection doesn't automatically make you more connected. Knowing what emotional intelligence looks like doesn't mean you're exercising it in your real conversations. Transformation happens in the gap between understanding and practice, in the messy, imperfect, sometimes awkward process of actually trying, in real conversations, with real people, with real stakes. So here's how to move forward in a way that actually works. Start with one thing, not 15 things. 1. Look back at what resonated most in what you've just read. What made you think, yes, that's the thing I've been missing? What felt like the clearest gap between where you are and where you want to be? Start there. Work that specific skill deliberately and consistently until it begins to feel natural, until it's no longer something you're doing, but something you are. Then add the next layer. Communication skills are built like physical fitness. No one builds a strong body by attempting every exercise simultaneously. They pick the fundamentals, go deep, develop real strength, and progressively add complexity over time. The same principle applies here. Practice in low-stakes situations first. Before you try advanced active listening in the hardest conversation of your year, try it with a colleague over lunch. Before you attempt to navigate a deeply difficult personal conflict using everything you've learned, practice the building blocks in smaller moments. This isn't about avoiding challenge. It's about building genuine competence before the moment when it really counts. Seek feedback actively. Most people only get feedback on their communication when something goes wrong, when someone is hurt, frustrated, or disappointed. Proactively asking for feedback is one of the fastest accelerants of development available to you. Ask people you trust. When I explain complex things, do I give you enough context, or do I assume too much? When we disagree, do I seem genuinely open to your perspective? Specific questions produce specific, useful answers. Vague questions produce polite non-answers. Keep a communication journal, not a detailed diary, just brief, honest reflections after significant conversations. What went well? What felt off? When did you feel most genuinely present? When did you notice yourself slipping into old patterns? What would you do differently? Over time, these reflections reveal patterns, consistent strengths to leverage, consistent blind spots to address that are almost invisible without the record. Observe excellent communicators with curiosity. When you encounter someone who handles a difficult situation with unusual grace, or who draws people in effortlessly, or who gives feedback in a way that lands without stinging, pay attention. What specifically are they doing? What principles from what you've learned are visible in their approach? The goal isn't imitation, it's extraction. Pull out the principle, adapt it to your own authentic style, and practice it until it's yours. Here's something worth sitting with as you close this chapter. Every person you will ever meet is navigating something harder than you can see from the outside. Every person you will ever talk to is carrying some version of that invisible need to be seen, to be understood, to matter to someone. Every conversation you have is an opportunity to either feed that need or starve it. That's not a small thing. The world doesn't suffer most from a shortage of intelligent people or talented people or hard-working people. It suffers most from a shortage of people who can connect, who can make others feel genuinely understood, who can navigate difficulty without escalating it, who can influence without manipulating, who can lead without diminishing. You are building that capacity right now, not perfectly, not all at once, but deliberately, consistently, and with growing skill. And here's what happens as that skill deepens. Your relationships become richer. Your professional opportunities expand. Your confidence grows. Not the brittle kind that requires constant validation, but the quiet, grounded kind that comes from knowing you can show up well in almost any situation. But perhaps the most meaningful thing that happens is subtler than all of that. You become someone that other people feel better for having talked to, someone they seek out when they need to think clearly, when they need to feel heard, when they need someone who will tell them the truth with genuine care, someone whose presence in a room quietly raises the quality of what's possible there. That is not a small legacy to build. That is, in fact, one of the most important things a human being can become. Your communication skills are not fixed. They're not inherited. They're not determined by your past or your personality or the family you grew up in. They are built, conversation by conversation, choice by choice, moment by moment. And you've already started. Now go use it.